So today I was asked what's the best evidence that Jesus was actually a person. And while many Christians wholeheartedly simply believe this, they take this subject for granted. There's a reason that inside of atheist, naturalist, secular groups that this is a question, that it is to some degree a debate. Though it is in large part resolved through secular scholarship, that there is a consensus that Jesus was an actual person. And to settle why this debate is happening, or to understand why this debate is happening, is a few reasons. Firstly, we don't really have, to the best we can tell, any testimony from anyone who actually ever said they saw Jesus. By that, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is consensus by scholarship that they were written after the times that were assigned. They were never named that they belong to Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John inside of the text. And even like the book of Matthew refers to the character of Matthew in third person. And we don't believe these Gospels were written by the people that they are now attributed to, nor do they, inside of the text, say that they were written by these people. Additionally, we have most of the rest of the books of the New Testament is written by Paul. Paul admittedly never met Christ in the flesh. He seen Christ in a vision. And then the rest of the few books that we have some pseudepigraphicals like 1st and 2nd Peter that are believed to be pseudepigraphic. And then we have a few other books that are they're just questioned, or we don't really know what their source is, where they come from. So this is the biggest problem that we have is the dating. And even when we look at a book like James, which is probably the book that we most think it's possible that this book was written by someone who actually met Jesus. Notably, the book of James says almost nothing about Jesus whatsoever. And then secondly, James still inside of this time in this area of Galilee, and the ideal that they would have not spoke Arabic as their primary language, or that they would have knew Greek as a secondary language, but not have something that was a part of the trade. I mean, this is unlikely. We don't have any reason to think that someone would know Greek other than this is being associated with James and it's written in Greek. So there's a big question mark to start with whether we have any written document or ever have had any written document that someone actually knew or had met Jesus. So this is the big issue on that side. So on the side where we think that Jesus still was a real person, there's three primary categories that we run into here. The three groups that we can group this question into is that the Bible is completely correct, or that it's accurate, however you want to frame it, and that all of this happened and that Jesus is a real person. Or we can look at the second framing, that is, the Bible may not be completely accurate and it is passed down through generation and hearsay, but it was still a real person, even though we might have gotten a lot of this stuff, wrong. And then the third one is that he was entirely fabricated for the purposes of creating a religion. And some people, the reason that they think that, the third one is because we don't have any original testimony and everything seems so organized in terms of the messages and whatnot, even though there is some continuity issues. For the most part, everything seems quite organized in how it's put together. Especially the early church and the early church structure. I say the early church. As we get into the 2nd and 3rd century, we definitely get great structuring and movement of it. So it could appear that this was something that got contrived in some way. And then you have things like forgeries, like you have the Josephus forgery. You have the Testimonium Flavium, which was forged. So we get a lot of documents that start to look like things were meddled with to try to make them look like Jesus was a cartridge. And that's generally the fingerprints of some connery going on. So there's some skepticism on that side. Now, the reason that we think that he still was a real person, there's a few reasons. And I think the greatest argument, in my opinion, and I'm not sure what you want to call the argument. I don't believe it officially has a name, but it is a dissidence argument. You could call it the Bethlehem dissidence argument, or you could call it the the Nazareth problem or something like this. But I'll get to the root of it. This is the problem. If these are the three primary categories that we're talking about, that it's true holistically, it's true partially, but there's something going on, but it's based off of a real person, and thirdly, it's fabricated. While we might be able to large part get rid of the first proposition and say, well, there's no way that everything is correct about it. We really can't get rid of the second proposition, and the third proposition has some damage. It has some damage to the argument, and the damage that it has to the argument is this proposition that I was mentioning. So let's look at it like this. If they were going to create it whole cloth, the problem is the Bethlehem issue, that Jesus is said to have been from Nazareth. And him being a Nazarene seemed already contradictory to the prophecies that were given from the Jews. And it's one of the 5 primary reasons that the Jews never actually accepted Jesus as the Messiah, is because they thought that he was supposed to be from Bethlehem. He was supposed to be from that tribe, so to speak. So him not being from there, him being a Nazarene, was problematic. Now, 2 of the Gospels reconciled this by saying, well, that he was born in Bethlehem. He was just kind of passing through, and he was born in Bethlehem, and then he was out of it immediately after the birth. And this was very unsatisfying to what the Jews thought the prophecy was supposed to be to start with. And there's even some argument back and forth in the book of John where some people inside of the crowd are arguing that says, how can he be the Messiah, that he's from Nazareth and all. So there was already some contention that we understand when John's gospel was written. So I think the problem is, if you're going to create a book whole cloth, you don't create these contradictions. It's kind of an embarrassment of the subject. The only good reason that we could come up with that this issue would happen is that it looks like you're trying to reconcile him to prophetic story and say, yeah, he was born in Bethlehem, and we kind of had a drive-by birthing, so to speak, where he was born in Bethlehem, so he checked the box or made the criteria, but you couldn't really say that he was from Bethlehem or that he was raised in Bethlehem in the way that the Jews thought that the prophecy, would fall out, because people might have knew that he was not from Bethlehem. So the problem is, if you have a real story that you're having to contort and move, you have anchor points of people who know the truth that man is from Nazareth. They know that he is a Nazarene. Whereas if you're creating this story holistically, whole cloth, you don't make this problem. You're creating a problem for yourself. So if you're creating the problem, if you're creating the story holistically, believe you me, he would have been born in Bethlehem, and he'd have been raised in Bethlehem, and he would have met the full criteria that the Jews were expecting inside of that category. The fact that he wasn't, and there seems to be some bending and twisting to try to make him line up with that prophecy, it starts to make it look like you had something that was real, and it's not clean and perfect because you had to try to move it a little to make it align. And that, from the secular perspective, is probably the best argument that was a real carriage that this was based off of. And while the people of the time did try to get it to position, and I'm not saying that it didn't position. Maybe there was a drive-by birthing, so to speak, that he was just born in Bethlehem. But it was very unsatisfactory to the Jewish prophecy, and it was very unsatisfactory to many people of the time, as it is alluded to in John, that people are arguing about him being from Nazareth. But you would have, if you created the religion whole cloth, you don't create this kind of problem inside of it. It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassing problem to create if you're going to create the religion whole cloth. So I think this is, in my opinion, the best argument that this is based off of a real person, because you can't bend. You can bend a real person's story, but you can't break the continuity of it. If the story is starting in the earlier generations, we're talking 40s, 50s BC, right after Christ, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, he was from Bethlehem." If you're saying that he was from Bethlehem at this time and you just whole cloth made him up, no one would dispute that. Whereas if there were actual people who saw him, knew him, maybe they grew up with him in Nazareth, then there would be a huge problem. You would lose huge credibility because those people would know better. They would know that he wasn't from Bethlehem. Those people from Nazareth that knew him, that saw him through his childhood and whatnot, that saw him as he was an adult, and that people that knew that that's, where he laid his head, so to speak, that he was from Nazareth, then trying to make him from Bethlehem would have been problematic. So I think that's the best evidence. It's the best evidence that I know of. In that, what it does is it doesn't prove any of the categories of the three primary categories that I was talking about. But what it does is we already have kind of an X mark that loses some credibility in category 1. And then we have an X mark that loses credibility in category 3. That category being that he was made up whole cloth. There's some damage to the proposition that he was made up. So then all we're left with is the second category that doesn't have some kind of denigration. The second category being that he was a person, but that maybe there was some twists and moves. Maybe we don't have everything right about the story and about the message of who the individual was.